Imagine a man so wealthy that when he took a trip, he crashed entire economies just by being generous. A king so rich that European map makers had to redraw their maps to include his empire. This is the true story of the African king who accidentally changed the course of world history forever. What's up, everyone? Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible stories you've probably never heard in school. And I'm telling you right now, this story is so wild, so unbelievable, that if it was fiction, nobody would believe it. But here's the thing. Every single word of this is true. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss stories like this. Trust me, by the end of this video, your mind will be completely blown. And if you stick around until the very end, I'll reveal just how wealthy this king actually was compared to anyone alive today. All right, let's jump into it. It's the year 1324. Europe is still recovering from wars and plagues. Most Europeans have never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. They think they know the whole world. They've got their maps showing Europe, parts of Asia, and the Mediterranean. But there's one massive problem with these maps. Africa barely exists on them. Sure, they knew about North Africa because of trade routes. But Sub-Saharan Africa? To Europeans, it was just blank space, unknown territory. They had no idea that at that very moment, one of the largest, wealthiest empires in human history was thriving there. The Mali Empire. This wasn't some small kingdom. We're talking about an empire that covered nearly 500,000 square miles. That's bigger than modern-day Western Europe. The empire stretched across West Africa, controlling crucial trade routes that moved gold, salt, and other precious goods across the Sahara Desert. And in 1312, a man named Musa became the Emperor of Mali. But he wasn't just called Musa. His full title was Mansa Musa, which means King of Kings. And let me tell you, that title was not an exaggeration. Now, before Musa became emperor, Mali was already wealthy, but it was about to become legendary. You see, the Mali Empire sat on top of some of the richest gold mines in the world. They also controlled the salt trade, and back then, salt was almost as valuable as gold because it was essential for preserving food. Musa inherited all of this. Overnight, he became the ruler of an economic powerhouse that Europeans didn't even know existed. But here's where our story really begins. Musa was a devout Muslim, and like all Muslims who could afford it, he wanted to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. This pilgrimage is called the Hajj, and it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Most people made this journey quietly with a small group. But Musa, he was about to do something that would echo through history for the next 700 years. In 1324, Mansa Musa began his journey to Mecca. And when I say journey, I don't mean he packed a bag and left. This was a procession unlike anything the world had ever seen. Picture this massive caravan moving across the desert. Historians estimate that Musa traveled with 60,000 people. 60,000? That's like a small city on the move. There were soldiers, merchants, scholars, officials, and servants, everyone dressed in the finest silk and carrying gold staffs. But wait, it gets crazier. Musa brought 80 camels with him. But these weren't just any camels. Each one carried 300 pounds of pure gold. Do the math on that. That's 24,000 pounds of gold. In today's money, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gold just being carried across the desert. And here's the thing. Musa wasn't carrying all this gold to keep it. He was going to give it away. The caravan took months to cross the Sahara Desert. They stopped in cities along the way, And at every stop, Musa did the same thing. He gave away gold, lots of gold. He'd hand out gold bars to random people on the street. He'd give massive donations to mosques and religious scholars. If someone needed help, Musa would just give them gold. This generosity sounds amazing, right? Well, it was about to cause a massive problem. When Musa reached Cairo, Egypt, the city had never seen anything like him. Remember, Cairo was a major trading hub. It was sophisticated, wealthy, and connected to the Mediterranean world. They'd seen wealthy travelers before, but never anything like this. Musa stayed in Cairo for 3 months. During those 3 months, he continued his habit of giving away gold to everyone. He spent gold in the markets. He donated gold to churches and mosques. He gave gold to poor people on the streets. He even accidentally bumped into someone and apologized by giving them gold. Now, here's where basic economics comes into play. When you flood a market with any product, its value goes down. And Musa flooded Cairo with so much gold that he literally crashed their economy. The price of gold in Cairo dropped by 25%. 25%! That might not sound like much, but imagine if a quarter of your money's value just disappeared overnight. That's what happened to everyone in Cairo who had been saving gold. The inflation was so bad that it took Egypt 12 years to recover. 12 years! One man's 3-month visit caused over a decade of economic chaos. But here's the wild part. Musa actually realized what he'd done. On his way back home, he stopped in Cairo again. And this time, he borrowed gold at high interest rates to try to remove some gold from circulation and stabilize the economy. Think about that. He gave away so much gold that he had to borrow gold back to fix the economy. Word of this incredible display of wealth spread like wildfire. Merchants who traded with Cairo told stories about the African king with unlimited gold. These stories traveled across the Mediterranean to Italy, Spain, France, and beyond. For the first time in history, Europeans started paying serious attention to sub-Saharan Africa. Now, let's talk about how this changed everything for Europe. Before Musa's journey, European maps basically ignored West Africa. They'd draw the Mediterranean coast and maybe sketch some vague lines going south, but that was it. Africa was a mystery to them. But after the stories about Musa reached Europe, mapmakers had a problem. They were hearing consistent reports about this massive, wealthy empire in West Africa. They couldn't ignore it anymore. In 1375, just 50 years after Musa's pilgrimage, a famous map was created. It's called the Catalan Atlas, and it's one of the most important maps in history. This map was made for the King of France, and it was considered the most accurate map in the world at that time. And right there on the map, for the first time ever, the Mali Empire appears. But here's what makes it even more interesting. The mapmaker didn't just mark Mali's location. He drew an illustration of Mansa Musa sitting on a throne, wearing a crown, and holding a massive gold nugget in his hand. The caption next to the illustration says, "This African lord is called Musa Mali, lord of the African people. So abundant is the gold in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." Think about what this means. European mapmakers were literally redrawing their understanding of the world because of one man's journey. Africa wasn't blank space anymore. It was the location of incredible wealth and power. This map changed European perception completely. Suddenly, traders and merchants were asking questions. Where exactly is this gold coming from? How can we get there? What else does Africa have that we don't know about? These questions planted seeds that would eventually grow into the age of exploration. European nations became obsessed with finding sea routes to Africa. They wanted access to that gold. They wanted to trade with these wealthy African kingdoms. Portuguese explorers started sailing down the west coast of Africa. Spanish explorers did the same. Within 100 years, Europeans had mapped the entire African coastline. And it all started because Mansa Musa took a trip to Mecca and gave away too much gold. But Mansa Musa wasn't just famous for his wealth. He actually used that wealth to build something that lasted far beyond his lifetime. During his pilgrimage, Musa met scholars, architects, and poets from across the Islamic world. He convinced many of them to return with him to Mali. He wanted to transform his empire into a center of learning and culture. And that's exactly what he did. Musa focused his attention on the city of Timbuktu. Now, today, when people say, "from here to Timbuktu," they mean somewhere incredibly far away. But back in the 1300s, Timbuktu was about to become one of the most important cities in the world. Musa built mosques throughout his empire. The most famous is the Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu, designed by a Spanish architect that Musa brought back from his pilgrimage. This mosque still stands today, over 700 years later. But more importantly, Musa established universities and libraries in Timbuktu. The city became a major center of Islamic learning. Scholars came from as far as Egypt and the Middle East to study there. The libraries in Timbuktu held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on subjects like mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law. Think about that. While much of Europe was still struggling with literacy, Timbuktu had become a university town with a thriving intellectual culture. Musa also established standardized trade routes and built rest stops across his empire. He created a stable economic system that made Mali the center of West African trade for generations. Under Musa's rule, Mali became more than just wealthy. It became sophisticated, cultured, and influential. Musa ruled for 25 years until his death in 1337. After he died, his sons continued to rule, but none of them had the same vision or capability. The empire slowly declined over the next century, eventually breaking apart into smaller kingdoms. But the impact of what Musa had built couldn't be erased. The trade routes remained. The cities he developed continued to thrive. And most importantly, his journey had permanently changed how the world viewed Africa. So let's talk about the big picture. Why does this story matter? Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was the first time sub-Saharan Africa appeared on the radar of European powers as a place of wealth and civilization. Before Musa, Europeans had written off Africa as an unknown wilderness. After Musa, they saw it as a land of opportunity and riches. This directly led to the Age of Exploration. European nations spent the next 2 centuries trying to reach Africa by sea. They wanted that gold. They wanted access to those trade routes. And eventually, they wanted to control it all. And here's the tragic irony. Musa's display of wealth, which came from a place of generosity and religious devotion, actually helped trigger the European colonization of Africa. The same gold that Musa gave away freely would later be taken by force. By the 1500s, European powers were establishing colonies on the African coast. By the 1800s, they had divided up the entire continent. The wealth and power that Mali once represented was exploited and extracted. It's one of history's cruel twists. Mansa Musa showed the world African prosperity and power, and that very display eventually contributed to Africa's exploitation. But there's another side to this legacy. Today, historians recognize Mansa Musa as possibly the wealthiest person who ever lived. Adjusted for inflation and economic impact, his wealth is estimated at $400 billion. That's more than modern billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or Bill Gates. More importantly, his story reminds us of a chapter of history that often gets forgotten. Before European colonization, Africa had powerful empires, sophisticated cities, and incredible wealth. The Mali Empire was just one of many African civilizations that were advanced, organized, and influential. Mansa Musa's journey proves that for centuries, African kingdoms were major players in global economics and culture. They weren't discovered by Europeans. They were already there, thriving and powerful, shaping the world in their own right. And that's the incredible true story of Mansa Musa, the African king who changed European history forever. One pilgrimage, one generous man, and the entire course of world history shifted. If this story blew your mind like it blew mine, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell, because we're always uncovering amazing historical stories that you never learned in school. Drop a comment below and let me know. Had you ever heard of Mansa Musa before? What do you think about his legacy? I want to hear your thoughts. And if you want more mind-blowing true stories from history, check out the video appearing on your screen right now. Trust me, it's another story that sounds too crazy to be true, but every word is factual. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.